everybody. This is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and I'm going to take a look at a couple of recent games I played in a local tournament. No especially prestigious opponents, but I think that's part of the charm and value of these games, in that they'll both show, I think, common kinds of club play errors in action. Both of these games are Kings Indians, and I'm white in both cases. Normally speaking, it's not an opening that I face an awful lot. I'm not generally a D4 player, although I try to vary my openings around. But for variety, I mean, if you can't play something a little bit out of the ordinary when you're playing lower-rated players, then you'll never do it. So it's good to vary around and experiment with new things, especially in a more safe kind of context. So part of the point of this presentation is to show, again, some typical errors that can be made at the club level and to help you avoid them in your own games. Okay, so this is the first game. So I had white, and here we are in one of the main line positions in all of chess. Okay, white has played many moves here. The most popular move is to simply castle, and then knight c6, d5, knight e7, and here white has kind of a difficult choice in some ways. White wants to play the move c5. Alright, so this is one of white's basic strategic ideas to achieve this advance. But it's a little tough to do it. Okay, it's not that tough, but I mean, it takes a little preparation. Now, the nicest move to be able to make here would be bishop to e3. This would be great, but knight to g4 kind of thwarts that, plus then black can play f5 straight away. So one common move for white here is to play knight to e1. And the problem with this is that after knight to d7, let's say bishop to e3 or knight to d3. Let's do knight to d3. f5. Okay, let's say bishop to d2, knight f6, f3, f4. Okay, now white plays c5. But the problem here is that this knight on d3 is kind of stupid, in that after this exchange takes place here, we'd really like to have the knight on c4. That would be ideal. Okay, well, so let's go back here. And maybe you can play knight to d2 instead. Alright, the problem with this, though, is that, alright, let's say black plays a5, a3. One kind of common approach for black is to play c5. It's not the only move here, but it's a main move. And this thwarts it. And, of course, I'd rather have the bishop outside here on e3. Okay, well, still another idea here is to play b4. Alright, so this is the so-called bayonet attack, which is very popular. And this isn't bad. But, one thing that black can play is a5, and still white's development gets a little bit, is a little bit funny. Okay, he doesn't get to put all his pieces on ideal squares. So I decided to try the move bishop to e3. Now, this is no novelty. This is a very well-known variation. It's called the Gligorich system. And it's very effective against a lot of club players. Okay, maybe not against experienced kids or stronger players at a club, but my opponent here was 1700, very experienced player, but not a player who, let's say, is really focused on his repertoire in a kind of rigorous way. So he's kind of playing on general impressions, and that's what I expected. And so he played knight to c6. I played d5, knight e7, knight to d2, knight e8, c5. f5, okay, let's make some more moves, and knight to c4. And I've managed to get everything that I wanted. So my bishop on f2 is on the diagonal that I want it to be on. The pawn has made it to c5, free of charge, very easily. The knight is on c4, where I want it. So in short, I got everything. And in fact, even better, I didn't start with castling. So remember back here in the main line, it starts with white castling. Well, in this position, I haven't castled, so even if black goes crazy with his kingside attack, I could just castle queenside or leave my king in the center and quite possibly avert all of his aggression in that way. So this has been very successful, and we'll see in the game that things really go pretty smoothly from here. Okay, well, what should he have done? Well, in fact, there are a lot of moves here. I mean, there's no, I think, one clear-cut, absolute best move. But the basic idea, or I should say the basic move, if black is kind of harboring ambition still of getting into something like the d5 systems, knight c6, castles, knight c6, d5 stuff, then maybe he should play knight to g4. So bishop to g5, f6. Okay, sometimes the bishop goes to h4, sometimes it goes to c1. They're both very common. Let's say bishop to h4, knight c6, d5, knight e7, knight to d2, knight h6, although h5 is also important, and so is f5. But in any case, we can see that we're slowly but surely working our way back into that kind of setup where black is able to start pushing his king side. So that said, white's still in perfectly good shape here. Anyway, this would be the way that you should play with black if you like this kind of opposite side attacking race. But there are other very good ways to play. So after bishop to e3, knight a6 is also quite good. And again, let's say castles. Again, you can play knight to g4. Or sometimes white plays d5, and then knight to g4, bishop g5, f6, bishop h4, and again, inevitably, black's kingside pawns are going to slowly but surely trundle their way down the board in hopes of creating some mayhem against the white king. Alright, still a third try is to play e takes d4, knight takes d4, rook e8, f3, c6, with the idea of d5. And Kasparov had some very interesting games in this system. He played against Karpov and Drew, and later on against Gelfand and won. So bishop f2, d5, ed, cd, castles. c5 is also quite important. I believe that's what happened in the Karpov and Gelfand games. And we have very sharp play here. So white has a great knight on d4. The pawn on d5 is isolated. But black has very good possibilities on the dark square. So we can see e3 is kind of a weakness. You might be seeing something like knight h5 coming up, hitting here, and it could be further pressure on d4. So there's a lot of ways by which black can kind of amp up the pressure on the dark squares. Okay, I think there's one other system too. c6 can be played, knight b to d7 can be played. So really quite a lot of different ways for black to handle this sort of position, and they lead to very different kinds of play. But again, what you can't do, at least not if you hope to be anywhere near equality, is to play as if white had castled instead with knight to c6. So let's see what happens. Okay, so again, I've pretty much gotten everything I could want. Still have to win the game, of course, but it's a very comfortable position. Okay, black played rook to f7, typical kind of idea in these positions to play bishop f8, rook g7, knight g6, h5, g4, and so on. So the rook helps to keep an eye on c7, the bishop will help keep an eye on d6. Okay, well, I'm going to keep advancing on the queen side. I could prepare to just take on d6 and jump on the c file, but I think there are things that I can do that are more profitable. I'd like to play, let me get rid of all that stuff, I'd like to play a4 and a5, and then possibly play knight to b5, take, and then I'm hitting a7. And if he plays a6, then I get the b6 square. And that's part of the idea behind playing the pawn to a5. However, if I play a4 straight away, I at least have to consider a5 as a response, and the attempt to block the queen side a bit. Of course, I'm much better here too, but I decided that I didn't want to even allow this and played b4, which is fine. Knight g6, a4, h5, a5. Okay, so now in addition to the idea of playing cd and knight to b5 in some order or other,